Hello, my name is Perry, and this is the story of how my own parents betrayed me in the most heartless way possible, and how I gave them a revenge so shocking they never saw it coming. All my life, I was the daughter who stayed, the quiet one, the one who put aside her own dreams so she could be there when my parents needed me. I was the one who sat by my mother's side when she couldn't sleep at night, the one who drove my father to every doctor appointment, the one who kept the house running when money was tight, the one who gave and gave until there was almost nothing left of me. My sister Anna was different. She was the golden child, the star, the one they adored and spoiled no matter what she did. Every mistake of hers was forgiven. Every dream of hers was funded, while I was left to be the forgotten shadow that kept everything afloat. When my grandmother passed away, she left me her house. Not Anna, not both of us, just me. Because she saw me in a way no one else ever had. She saw the sacrifices, the silence, the tears I hid, the years of being invisible, builded by some of us tonight, builded by our non-builded. That house wasn't just bricks and walls, it was proof that I mattered, that someone valued me, that I wasn't just the background of my family story, but to my parents, it was nothing more than money waiting to be used. One night at dinner, my mother said it so calmly, as if her words were already written in stone. Perry, Anna, and James need a bigger house now that the baby's on the way. You don't need your grandmother's place. It's only fair you sell it and help them. That's what family does. I froze, the fork slipping in my hand, and before I could respond, my father slammed his hand against the table, his voice cutting through me like a blade. Stop being selfish. That's a free house. You didn't earn it. Either share it or you're not my daughter anymore. My heart stopped in that moment. Not his daughter anymore. After all the years I had given up for them, after all the times I chose them over myself, this was how little I meant. My chest ached, but I swallowed every ounce of pain and said nothing, because in that silence, something inside me broke forever. The obedient daughter they thought they could control, the peacemaker who always gave in, she died at that table, and in her place was someone else. A Perry who would never bow again. A Perry who would not be used, not be shamed, not be erased. They thought they could strip away the one thing that was mine, but what they didn't know was that I had already decided how this would end. My revenge wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be messy. It would be precise, cold, unforgettable, and it all began with one quiet decision I made that very night, Dot. The night after that dinner, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind burning with anger and hurt, replaying every word my father had thrown at me. Either share it or you're not my daughter anymore. Those words didn't just sting, they seared themselves into my soul. I kept thinking about all the years I had been their caretaker, their safety net, their invisible backbone, and now they were ready to erase me just to hand everything to Anna. I realized then that nothing I had done for them ever really mattered. They didn't see me as their daughter, they saw me as a tool. And I knew if I gave in once, I would be giving in for the rest of my life. That night, I made a decision. I was going to take back control in a way they would never see coming. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling but steady with purpose, and I called a real estate contact I had met months earlier. I told him I wanted to sell my grandmother's house quietly. No signs, no open listings, no gossip for the neighbors to spread. I wanted it done fast and done privately. He asked me if I was sure, and my voice came out colder than I expected. Yes. Find me a buyer they would never expect. Within a week, he had one. The papers were signed in silence, the money transferred to my account, and the keys handed over. I didn't even step foot back into that house before it changed hands. It hurt because that home carried so many of my grandmother's memories, but keeping it would mean keeping myself chained to a family that saw me as nothing. Selling it wasn't losing, it was winning my freedom. Days later, my parents showed up with a realtor, dragging Anna behind them with her smug little smile. They didn't know I had already sold it. I stayed hidden in my car across the street, watching them walk up the driveway, chatting and laughing like the house was already theirs. But the moment the door opened and the new owner stepped out, the laughter died. Their faces froze, and then the screaming began. Because standing in that doorway wasn't some stranger. It was someone from their past they had tried so hard to bury, someone they never thought would have any reason to cross paths with us again. And now that person held the keys to the house they thought they could steal from me. When the door opened and they saw who was standing there, my mother's hand flew to her chest and my father's face turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. Because the new owner of the house wasn't a stranger at all. It was my mother's estranged sister, my Aunt Linda, the woman my parents had cut out of our lives years ago after a brutal family feud over money and inheritance. I had grown up hearing their poisoned version of her, how she was selfish, manipulative, and didn't deserve a place in our family. But when I grew older, I learned the truth. Linda wasn't the villain they painted her to be. She had simply stood up to my father when he tried to pressure her into signing away her share of their parents' land years ago. She had fought back, refused to be bullied, and for that she was cast out. The irony was almost poetic. My parents, who had tried to rob me of my inheritance, were now face to face with the very sister they had betrayed, holding the deed to the house they thought they could hand over to Anna. I watched from across the street as my mother's voice cracked, "Linda, what are you doing here?" And Linda replied calmly, her voice steady and sharp, "I live here now. Your daughter sold me the house." The silence that followed was electric. My father stammered, his pride unraveling with every word. No, this can't be. She wouldn't dare." But Linda cut him off with a smile that said everything. My parents had spent years pretending she didn't exist, telling everyone in town that she was greedy and untrustworthy, and now she was the one shutting the door on them. I could hear my mother's voice rising, filled with rage and disbelief. "Perry, how could you do this to us?" But she didn't know I was watching from the shadows, and the truth was I didn't feel guilt, not even a flicker. For once in my life, I wasn't their puppet. I wasn't the forgotten daughter begging for scraps of love. I was the one holding all the power, and it felt intoxicating. My sister Anna started crying, wailing about how she needed the house, how I had ruined everything, and my father tried to push his way past Linda, but she stood firm in the doorway, refusing to move. "This house belongs to me now," she said, "and you are not welcome here." The fury in my parents' eyes was almost pitiful, like spoiled children denied their toy. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. They weren't just angry at me. They were terrified because for the first time in their lives, someone had beaten them at their own cruel game. The days that followed were a storm, not just outside in the cold November rain, but inside my family too, because my parents could not accept defeat. Not from me, not from Linda, not from anyone. My father showed up at my apartment uninvited, pounding on the door until my neighbors started whispering in the hallways, his voice shaking the walls as he shouted that I had disgraced the family name, that I had spit on everything they had given me. But when I opened the door and looked him in the eye, all I saw was fear disguised as rage. He tried to threaten me, telling me he'd take me to court, that I had no right to sell the house, but the deed was clean. The money was already gone from my hands, and there was nothing he could do to undo it. My mother, on the other hand, took another route. She went around town spreading lies about me, whispering in church gatherings and grocery aisles that I had betrayed my blood, that I had stolen what was not mine. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what people thought. I had lived too long under the weight of their opinions, their gossip, their manipulation, and now I felt free, almost untouchable. Anna tried calling me, sobbing into the phone, saying that because of me, she and her fiancé had nowhere to live, that their wedding plans were falling apart, but I let her words roll off me like rain on glass because she had stood by and watched as they stripped me of everything, and now she wanted my sympathy. No, I wasn't going to play that role anymore. What none of them knew was that this was only the beginning. Selling the house was never just about revenge. It was about sending a message, about showing them that I wasn't the weak, invisible daughter anymore. But my parents weren't the kind of people to bow their heads and accept humiliation. They started plotting, whispering behind closed doors, trying to dig up old secrets they thought could be used against me. They wanted to break me, to drag me down in front of the same people who had watched them lose the house. And I knew deep down that the real war hadn't even started yet. I could feel it in my bones, the shift in the air, the way my parents' silence grew heavier, more dangerous with each passing day, like the calm before a storm. They stopped yelling, stopped banging on my door, and instead moved in shadows, whispering with people I hadn't seen in years, distant relatives who never cared about me until now, suddenly circling like vultures. One evening while leaving work, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, my father's old Buick, the same one he swore he'd sold, and I knew instantly that he had been following me. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced myself to keep walking, head held high, even though every step felt like I was walking through a trap. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was my Aunt Maggie, a woman who had always treated me kindly, and her voice shook when she said, "Perry, I think your parents are planning something. They want to claim you forged the documents on the house. They've been digging for anything to ruin you." My blood ran cold. They weren't just angry, they were desperate, willing to risk everything just to crush me back into submission. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, not just because of their lies, but because these were the people who raised me, who held my hand as a child, and now they wanted to destroy me. But if they thought I'd crumbled, they were wrong. I wasn't the same weak daughter anymore. The next morning, I went to the courthouse myself, pulling every record, every signature, every legal stamp tied to the sale. I armed myself with proof, with undeniable evidence, because if they wanted war, I would make sure I was 10 steps ahead. That night, as I tucked the folder of documents under my arm, I whispered to myself that I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting to finally break free from the chains of a family that never saw me as their daughter, only as their scapegoat. Thought the documents gave me security, but they didn't calm the storm inside me. Something told me there was more, something hidden beneath their anger, a reason they were clawing so viciously at me instead of letting go. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the house, so I started digging deeper into old files, records my parents probably assumed I'd never touch. Late one night, buried in a box of yellowed papers my mother had shoved into the attic years ago, I found a stack of letters tied with fraying ribbon. My hands shook as I opened them, and what I read made my skin crawl. They weren't love letters, they were legal warnings, debt collection threats, final notices. For years, my parents had been drowning in debt, covering it with lies, using me as a distraction, blaming me for being selfish while they were bleeding money behind closed doors. And then the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. One envelope carried the name of the very house they tried to force me to give up. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was collateral. They had mortgaged it secretly long before my name was ever tied to it, and when I sold it, I unknowingly pulled the ground out from under them. Their world wasn't collapsing because I betrayed them, it was collapsing because their lies finally caught up. I sat on the floor, the letters scattered around me like shattered glass, my chest tight, my eyes burning. Every sacrifice they had demanded of me, every cruel word, every manipulation, it was all built on a mountain of secrets. They weren't angry because I sold the house. They were angry because I exposed them. That night, I swore to myself that if they wanted to drag me into war, I would do worse than defend myself. I would uncover every secret they tried to bury and make sure the world saw the people they really were. The discovery of those letters set something inside me ablaze, a fire I didn't even know I carried. All those years of being told I was ungrateful, unworthy, selfish, it all made sense now. They weren't protecting the family, they weren't teaching me lessons, they were hiding their own failures behind my back. I didn't cry that night, I didn't even scream, I just sat there with this eerie calm washing over me, knowing exactly what I had to do next. The following morning, I made copies of every letter, every threat, every debt notice, and I tucked them neatly into a folder. Then I drove to my sister's house. When she opened the door, smirking like she had already won, I handed her the folder without saying a word. She flipped through the pages, her face draining of color with each line she read, until she finally looked at me with wide, hollow eyes. "They didn't tell me this," she whispered, her voice trembling, and that was the moment I realized she wasn't just a pawn in their plan. She was a victim too, caught in their web of manipulation. But sympathy didn't come easily. The difficulties just abused the cost of the text of the debate. I told her flatly, "You wanted my house and they were ready to destroy me to give it to you. Now you know the truth. Decide if you're still willing to let them use you as their weapon." Then I walked out, leaving her standing in the doorway, clutching those papers like they were burning her skin. By the time I got home, my phone had already lit up with calls from my parents, their voices shrill and furious on every voicemail, accusing me of betrayal, warning me that I'd regret this. But for once, I didn't feel small. For once, I wasn't the weak one. Their empire of lies was starting to crack, and I was the one holding the hammer dot. It didn't take long for my parents to strike back, and this time they went for my reputation. Within days, whispers began spreading through family and friends, neighbors who barely knew me suddenly looking at me with judgment in their eyes. My parents told everyone I had betrayed them, that I sold the house out of greed, that I didn't care about my own blood. They painted me as cold-hearted, selfish, a disgrace to the family name. At first it stung, I won't lie, hearing people I grew up around mutter things under their breath, catching relatives shake their heads at me in church. It made my chest feel tight, like I couldn't breathe. But then I realized something important. Their entire defense was built on appearances. They didn't want the world to know the truth about their debts, their lies, the mess they created behind closed doors. They thought smearing me would distract everyone. That was their weakness. And so instead of fighting their words with words, I began quietly gathering every proof I had: bank statements, copies of overdue bills, property documents they had hidden from me, Even messages they had carelessly sent to my sister about how I was just a tool to fix their problems. I kept all of it safe, waiting for the right moment to let it burn through the pretty little image they had built for themselves. For once, I wasn't rushing with anger. I was patient, steady, letting them believe I was breaking down under their public shaming. Because deep inside, I knew the most devastating revenge isn't in shouting the truth. It's in waiting for the perfect moment to rip the mask off when they least expect it, when their entire world is watching. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. My parents decided to throw a family gathering at my uncle's house, inviting cousins, distant relatives, old friends, anyone they could pull into their orbit. They wanted an audience, a stage to humiliate me on, to cement the story that I was the traitor who had destroyed the family's unity. I walked in and felt the air thicken. The second I stepped through the door, people's eyes darting toward me, whispers echoing like needles against my skin. My mother stood tall. My brains don't change. Her arm looped around my sister as though she was the chosen one, while my father cleared his throat and began his little performance. Our daughter, he said, his voice heavy with false sorrow, has turned her back on us for money. She sold what wasn't hers to sell. She broke this family apart. Every word was like a dagger, not because it hurt, but because I knew he was so sure of his power, so convinced no one could challenge him. And then, in that heavy silence, I pulled out the folder I had kept tucked under my arm. I laid it on the table and opened it slowly, letting the paper spill out like poison across the polished wood. Debt letters, foreclosure warnings, legal threats with their signatures, every dirty secret they'd hidden. Gas filled the room as relatives leaned forward, reading, realizing the truth for themselves. My mother's face went pale, her lips trembling, and my father's bravado cracked in front of everyone. For years, they had lived like royalty, but in a matter of minutes, their kingdom collapsed, and I was the one holding the torch. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't scream or cry, I just looked around the room and said, "You wanted the truth. Now you have it." And for the first time in my life, they were the ones shrinking under the weight of shame, not me. Not exposing them should have ended it, but instead it pushed my parents into a frenzy I'd never seen before. They were cornered animals now, desperate and vicious, and they lashed out in every direction. My father stormed into my job the following week, red-faced and raging, screaming at my manager that I was unstable, that I had stolen from the family, that hiring me was a mistake. My mother called distant relatives and spun new lies, telling them I had forged those debt letters, that I was sick in the head, that I needed help. It was almost laughable watching them claw at every scrap of control they thought they still had. But it wasn't without damage. People I had trusted stopped returning my calls. Friends began keeping their distance. Even my boss asked if everything was okay at home, his voice cautious, unsure if I was a liability now. I held it together on the outside, calm and unshaken, but inside I could feel the weight pressing harder, a silent war breaking me down piece by piece. And just when I thought they couldn't stoop any lower, I heard the one rumor that made my blood run cold. They were telling people I had sold the house to some stranger for cheap, that the new buyer was a con man who would flip it and vanish, leaving me with nothing but guilt. I almost laughed at how wrong they were, because the truth about who really lived inside that house was a secret I had kept buried, waiting for the perfect moment. And when they finally showed up with a realtor to prove their story, They weren't prepared for the face that answered the door, the face that sent them spiraling into screams. When the door swung open, the world seemed to freeze for a moment. My parents stood frozen on the porch, their realtor shifting uncomfortably beside them, but my eyes were fixed on the figure who stepped into view. It wasn't a stranger, it wasn't a con man, it was the last person they ever expected to see. My estranged aunt, my mother's own sister, the woman they had betrayed years ago and banished from our lives like she never existed. She stood there with a quiet strength, her arms folded, her gaze locked on them with a mixture of fury and satisfaction. My mother's face drained of color instantly, her lips trembling while my father let out a sound between a growl and a gasp. "You!" my mother stammered, unable to form words. My aunt simply leaned against the doorframe and said, "Yes, me. The house Perry sold is mine now. And unlike you, she didn't lie to me, she didn't use me, she gave me a chance to come back and reclaim what you stole." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my mother's sudden scream, a high-pitched, ugly sound that made the realtor step back in shock. For years, they had kept her ghost buried, whispering stories about how she was greedy, how she abandoned the family, but the truth was staring them in the face now. She hadn't left. They had pushed her out just like they tried to do with me. And in that moment, standing on that porch, watching my parents crumble under the weight of two daughters turning against them, I felt a satisfaction so sharp it was almost painful. Their empire of lies was burning, and this time they weren't just fighting me, they were facing the very woman they had erased from existence. After that night, my aunt and I sat together for hours, piecing together fragments of the past like a puzzle I never knew existed. She told me everything, how my parents had stolen her share of the inheritance years ago, how they manipulated documents to push her out, how they used the family name to bury her reputation while they built their empire on lies. Listening to her was like peeling back the skin of my childhood and realizing all the memories I thought were safe were soaked in poison. She admitted she had been waiting for a chance to confront them, but she never imagined it would be me, their own daughter, who would hand her the weapon. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, there was someone who knew exactly how it felt to be crushed by them. Someone who had lived through the same betrayal, the same gaslighting, the same endless cycle of shame. We decided we wouldn't just let the truth sit quietly. We would make sure the world saw it. My aunt still had contacts, people who remembered her before she disappeared, and I had every piece of evidence of their deaths and manipulations. Together, we began building something bigger than revenge. It was justice. We planned it carefully, not out of rage, but with precision, knowing that the right strike at the right time could bring down everything they had clung to for decades. My parents thought they were fighting their weak, isolated daughter, but what they didn't realize was that I now had an ally just as strong, just as scarred, and just as determined to end their reign of control. When the storm finally broke, it didn't come in whispers, it came like a flood. My aunt and I had gathered everything, every document, every letter, every lie they had spun, and we handed it straight to the people they had spent years impressing. Their church, their business partners, even the community board they flaunted as proof of their respectability. We gave them the truth, unfiltered and undeniable. The fallout was immediate. Calls started pouring into their house, not with sympathy, but with questions. with accusations, with demands for answers. My father's voice, once booming with authority, now cracked and stuttered in public meetings as people waved copies of his debts in his face. My mother, who had always paraded herself as the moral compass of the family, found herself cornered by the very women she once gossiped with, their eyes sharp, their words merciless. And then came the twist I never saw coming, my sister. She showed up at my door, tears streaking down her face, her pride shattered. She confessed that she had believed them all along, believed every poisonous word they fed her about me, but now she saw the truth and it was eating her alive. She begged me to forgive her, to let her stand with me, to not leave her drowning with them. I wanted to push her away, to let her sink for what she had done. But looking into her eyes, I saw the same fear, the same betrayal that had haunted me for years. For a moment, I wondered if this was another trick, another manipulation. But deep down, I knew she was just another casualty of their control. And as much as I hated admitting it, I felt the weight of choice pressing on me. Was she my enemy, or was she the last piece I needed to end them once and for all? In the end, I chose to let my sister stand beside me, not because I fully forgave her, but because I understood she had been molded by the same hands that tried to destroy me. Together, with my aunt by our side, we delivered the final blow. We took the mountain of evidence and handed it directly to the authorities, not just for the debts, but for the fraudulent transfers and the inheritance they had stolen years ago. Watching my parents dragged from the pedestal they had built, their faces exposed in shame, was not the victory of cruelty, it was the victory of truth. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from their control, free from their manipulation, free from the endless cycle of guilt they had shackled me with. Standing outside that courthouse, my sister clutching my hand, my aunt standing tall on my other side, I realized that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about who fights for you when the world tries to break you. And though my heart still aches from everything I lost, I know now that I gained something more powerful than their approval. I gained my voice, my strength, my freedom. This is my story, my revenge, my justice. And if you've been through something like this, if you've ever felt voiceless or betrayed, I hope my story gives you the courage to stand up and take your life back. If my journey touched you, if you want to hear more stories like mine, make sure you subscribe, share, and join me here, because the one thing I've learned is this: our voices are stronger when we rise together.